Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of ClueCon Weekly. Joining us this week is an expert on 911 and security, uh, Mark Fletcher, the VP of Public Safety Solutions at 911 Inform LLC. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Mark. It's a pleasure to have you.
Yeah, always a pleasure to be here for ClueCon, my friend. Good to see you.
And yeah, so last time we chat about a lot of things about security, 911, etc. But maybe it's worth restarting the discussion, as not many people are familiar with, especially with the legislations and the requirements and why it's so important. So, first of all, what are we talking about when we refer to enhanced 911 or NG 911 services?
Well, 911's been around since 1968 in one form or another. For the past 20 years, though, the industry has been trying to progress into next generation 911. Unfortunately, in public safety, there's not a huge culmination of people that have a lot of technology knowledge. So it's taken a long
Mm.
time for them to move out of that analog technology into a web enabled, RTC enabled, IP enabled next generation services. So that's really about the progression and doing things that you and I, as technologists, are fundamental for the past 30 years, even. But unfortunately, it's taken legislation to force people into being compliant, especially when we deal with advanced enterprise based communications, multi line telephone systems, as that has become more fluid in its nature with WebRTC and mobility. It's really created a problem with 911 because 911 is built on the construct that a telephone number equals a location. And you and I both
Yeah,
know that's probably the last thing that it means today.
yeah, it's no longer, it's almost never the case, I would say.
Yeah, I would say probably that's true. And you've got statistics showing up now where 90% or more of all calls are mobile based, right? So you've got them coming from an environment that almost can't be tracked or easily tracked, especially based on the old constructs.
Yeah. So there's and what is there anything that's a law right now that we need to be aware of regarding that?
Well, yeah. So there was an unfortunate incident that happened back in 2013 where a woman by the name of Carrie Hunt was murdered in a hotel down in Marshall, Texas. And she was murdered by her estranged husband. Her 9-year old daughter knew to call 911, but didn't know she needed to dial 9 for an outside line.
Oh,
Very basic, fundamental problem. So that brought about Carrie's Law, to where ubiquitous access was required on multi line telephones. Now, before that law even got passed, because we tried to keep it simple, other proponents came in and said, well, we need location as well. And the Ray Bombs Act came in with location reporting requirements that actually came into play about 2 or 3 years after that. And then all of that got finally codified under what's called the Title 47 Subchapter 9 laws, which is
mm,
where they got federal teeth and legislative powers and significant financial penalties if you're non-compliant. And that all just went into effect probably about 2 years ago. But there are now some substantial fines for a multi line telephone system, a voice over IP system that isn't 911 compliant from a direct access perspective, from a dispatchable location reporting perspective, um, with their endpoints on their networks. And that includes fixed and mobile devices.
Yeah. So, well, then there's a question which is quite interesting. So, there's a lot of WebRTC going on right now. So, from a SIP standpoint, when you're doing SIP, very often SIP are office-based systems, or maybe they're in a hotel. So, there is some degree of correspondence between where you are, sort of, and where responders should go. But WebRTC is web-based, and in some cases doesn't even have a telephony component. So, the interesting question is which systems do have to comply with the 911 legislation, 911, sorry, legislations, and what is the requirement for something like a web-based application? I'm on a browser, so I could be anywhere.
Right. So the thing is the legislation in the Ray Bombs Act section of the laws, we were very, very specific and careful that the language in there says any communications modality to be all inclusive. Um, so even if it's a web-based application, if it's a communications device that's capable of reaching 911, you have to provide direct access
Hmm.
on the digits 911, and you have to provide a dispatchable location of the origination device.
That applies to any system that's capable of placing a phone call effectively.
Yeah, that's right, Luca. Any system, any modality, because there were way too many loopholes that people were trying to utilize. And let's face it, people were dying.
What if it's a call center though?
Doesn't
So
matter.
we have many customers who have call centers who are WebRTC based. They are at home, and the agent is using the system for work, but they wouldn't use the system for a 911 call because they're not even supposed to work probably. So, or is it that's actually an interesting question. So many systems have limited capabilities to dial that are usually involving picking a contact from a list. So they cannot dial anything they want. They're able to dial, I want to dial this guy. So click on the link and the call goes out.
Right.
Is that system required to have some kind of 911 information?
So that's a very, very gray area. If it's a
Hmm.
work at home user and the system is not capable of reaching 911, there you might have some legal precedents to where you can't call 911, you don't have to provide 911 location. But what
Hmm.
you're stepping into is the other part of the law, which is Kerry's law, that says any communication system that reaches the outside world must be able to dial 911. So what's going to happen
Ooh.
is even if you win one side of the lawsuit from a legal perspective, what most people don't recognize is that you've got a wrongful death liability, and that's just personal liability. There's no laws, there's no
Oh wow.
requirements, there's nothing. Yeah, and so in Carrie Hunt's case, this was in 2013 in Texas. There was no county, federal, or state law that said that that hotel needed to do anything other than what it was doing. They provided a phone in the room and you could dial 911 and the phone was labeled to make it an emergency call. You call 911. So no law was violated. A jury awarded that family $42 million on a personal liability wrongful death lawsuit. Had nothing to do with the law, had nothing to do with technology.
Hmm. Well, that's that is quite interesting.
Well, yeah, and if
So,
that doesn't scare the hell out of everybody, I don't know what would. You've also got another case in St. Louis from last year where they had just put in a brand new voice over IP system, 5,500 endpoints. The one
Hmm.
endpoint they installed at a swimming pool happened to not be provisioned correctly. 911 worked, but it didn't go to the local 911 center. Because it wasn't provisioned correctly, it went out to a national call center in Colorado that was
Oh,
there and designed to be a backup 911 call center. But because that delayed the routing of the 911 call, they had a doctor testify that that caused the death of the child who drowned at that swimming pool. They did an audit on the network, and out of 5,500 endpoints, there were 5 or 10 that were misprovisioned and had no locations. Unfortunately, that pool phone was one of them. The
hmm.
family is suing initially for $40 million. When they found out about the two federal laws and they found out about the $42 million lawsuit from the Hunt family, rumor is they're upping that personal liability lawsuit into the hundred of millions of dollars
Wow.
because there's
For
previous precedents and there's two federal laws that said you should have done better. Now, you being a technologist, me being a technologist, 5 endpoints out of 5,500, statistically, wow, that's not bad, right? But
yeah.
still, it takes one.
So yeah, were endpoints who had a location and accessibility. I think the very gray area you referred to is again any specialized client where they
Yes.
have the capability to dial to phone numbers. But actually, there is a large number of those applications, right? Think about a UCAS app. So it's a unified communication application. You log in with username and password. It's usually used by small businesses to get, a new number for your business. You're
Yep.
opening a shop, your cell phone out, and those are used for that. Or call centers again; those are able to dial numbers. The call center in particular scares me because, frankly, I don't think anybody anywhere is compliant with that.
Sure. So I'm not a lawyer by any means, Luca. But let me just put on a lawyer hat for 1 second, and you
Mhm.
put on the technologist hat. So, Luca, does your phone system make phone calls?
Yes, definitely.
Do you do specific training to tell your users do not dial 911 on this phone?
I'm pretty sure almost nobody does.
Exactly. Did your user panic with an emergency condition? Yes. Did they have a device in front of them that they make phone calls on all day long? Yes. Did they panic and try to dial 911? Yes, they did. Are they no longer with
Oh,
us?
so
Yes, unfortunately. So, to
so
a jury of
training.
12, yeah, to a jury of 12 that know nothing about technology, that know nothing about anything, but your system caused the death of that person, who's guilty and who are you going to award? That's what you're facing, unfortunately.
Wow, yeah.
Yeah, it's a little scary, right? And you've got no law. You could be compliant with a law, there might not be a law. The law never even comes into play. It's a wrongful death, personal liability. And that's where the big money fine is. Again, $43 million, $42 million for the Hunt family. Rumored, but well over 100 million for the city of St. Louis. And don't you think they're going to use everything else to their advantage, saying that there's two federal laws? You should have known better. The Hunt case from 10 years ago. You should have known better.
Yeah, that's absolutely You're right. Yeah. But what's important here that you mentioned is if you perform specific training for your users, and if they know they shouldn't call 911 with the device, then you should be in the clear as long as it's clearly stated and maybe even, it's written somewhere in the page where you work from.
I don't, you know what? So here's the thing: you're going to have to convince a jury,
Hmm.
right? You can have it, you can have all that, and again, that's great to have all that, but you're going to have to convince a jury that that was drilled into your employee's head on a regular basis, because when you panic, you revert to what you know.
Well, I just was in DC. I just visited the Supreme Court and we attended a short hearing. That you can do that as a tourist from the gallery.
Sure.
And I don't want to be, I don't want to end up there. So you're
You
right.
know,
So yeah,
it gets a little tough, right? When you're on cross examination, you know.
and so let's assume we find out we need to give our call center agents a way to call. Uh, we don't know where they are, and we probably actually don't know. As in, well, the system doesn't know. How do we find out where someone is logged in from and taking calls?
Well, so that's the thing, right? So that's why we've done a lot of work when we developed our application to account for these difficult areas, right?
Mhm.
So we look for registration events. I look for a registration event from any device on the system. And I know that that device is there and I know it's shown up and I know how to reach that user profile, whether it's SMS, whether it's email, whether I call them. And I say, hey, Luca, you just came online with a device. You know what? I've examined the network forensics and I've found this out about you, but I'm not quite sure that I know enough exactly where you are. So now I can invoke location services on a device that's near you. For
Mm.
example, your mobile phone. You know what? I need to know where you are and I need some validation of that data.
Well, Chrome and many browsers has have the ability to check your location too. So maybe a good solution here could be, since we're talking about an hypothetical browser-based application, is when you log in, we try to get your location. You will probably have to accept because there's permissions for that in the
Yep, yep,
browser.
yep.
And then training becomes when the system asks you for your location, please either accept, or is it okay if they type in the location manually, or would that not be acceptable?
It is the least acceptable without any validation, but it's better than nothing, right?
What
And
I'm
the
thinking is someone that clicks no when the browser asks them for the coordinates. Someone clicks no, and then you can tell them, "Well, you refuse to let me use your browser location. So now, please give me an address. Maybe I could save that address from the previous session. So usually people will be working from home, so it'll be the same home every time, right? But that's not the problem. The point
no,
is,
but
uh,
what you could do, Luca, is you could create that as an exception. So
hmm,
you could accept the data, create an exception, and then let a supervisor understand, hey, you know what? Luca was being a little tough with me in answering my questions, and I'm not quite sure where he is. Or maybe that information combined with other data points is good. Well, you know what? He logged in last week from the same IP address and he gave me the address at that point. So, you know what? I know he's at that IP address again. I can make, I'm 80% sure that he's there. Or I pinged a smart device that I know he has, and I got location services on that smart device. I sent him the URL. Hey, here's click this link. Great. I kick off location services. I show you a map. Is this where you are? Yep, that's where I am. Great. Now I've got a secondary opinion of where you are, and maybe two or three things together will give me a level of assurity that I can trust.
Yeah, makes sense.
Right? It's not an all or nothing, one question, one shot. And again, you can assign, well, you know what, I'm not 100% sure, but I'm fairly sure. All right, we'll assign that for escalation.
I see. Yeah.
Right? True. Who said it's yes or no, one shot? We think in these, as programmers, we think in these binary terms, but we don't have to think that way.
Unnecessary. Yeah, there's a lot there. It is extremely extremely complicated, but I also think it's something that we need to start having guidelines for.
Yeah,
Especially, give people the baseline. The baseline would be, so you said that it's acceptable to type in your address. So this the lowest technology possible way will be to allow an agent to type in and update their position.
yes.
So you're working from here. That's better than nothing. And I suppose that's not fully acceptable, but at least that would work. Given that, of course, the most agents are able to type a number they call to call.
Right, but you
The,
could take that as your least lowest denominator and then flag that for a supervisor. And sometime during the day, the supervisor is going to call the agent and say, "Hey, Lukey, you told me you're at this address. You're at this address, right?" "Yes, I am." "You know your 911 won't work." "Yes, I do." "Okay, great. Now, as a company, you could show that you made an effort, and the idea is you're going to convince a jury, well, look, if Luca lied to me, Luca lied to me. These are the
Mhm.
steps I went through to make sure I had the best possible information that I could get. Was it wrong at the end of the day? Well, I'm sorry he lied to me. But he lied to me about his emergency location. I talked to him and said, "You know, your emergency location's not going to be." "Yeah, yeah, yeah, I know, I know." He decided he wanted to hide out someplace and not know where he was. Okay. Well, that's your argument to a jury that you did everything you possibly could within a reasonable effort.
Because in some
Or,
cases, you will be left with that, given that you're not really able to do it any other way.
right? So what you have to do is you have to put yourself in a jury's shoes. If someone went through those efforts and made put the technology in place and made every possible exception and still was wrong at the end of the day, well, did they try? Sure, they tried. Did they use good effort? Yeah, they did everything within their power. At the end of the day, the person who suffered didn't make it
Not
easy for them,
follow instructions.
didn't follow instructions. Now you end up shifting the liability over to that person. And
Yeah,
that's
because there
that
are many
that
cases where you won't be able to tell. Like again, if you refuse to tell me where you are, you type in the wrong address, etc. It's not. It can't be my fault.
exactly. So
It's,
again, it's
well,
about documenting everything. Did you do employee training? No. Oh, you didn't. Oh, well, then
oh,
how do I know your employee knew what to do? Did you stress this? No. Did you update him? No. Did you call and check? No. Oh, so you didn't do anything. So you basically gave them the razor blade, pointed to the street, and said, "Go play, but be careful." That's not good enough,
yeah,
right?
definitely
And,
needs
and,
to
and it's
be.
hard to write a rule for that.
I'm wondering. Well, then if they so okay, so a call center, if I train you, and that should work out. Same thing goes with the cell phone. How does so? This is a question that's unrelated. How does 911 work when you call it for a cell phone? Is the information pulled from the cell network in that case?
So there's two ways. There's the legacy location tracking, which is actually done when your call hits the tower. It goes to the 911 infrastructure. The 911 infrastructure goes back to the cellular network and asks. them to start triangulating that cell phone signal off of 3 or more towers. The call goes to the 911 center based on what tower you hit, and then the 911 dispatcher gets the tower location, and within 30 seconds they can requery the network, and they'll get an estimated trilateration of where you were based on 3 towers. Not very accurate, could be a half a mile or more off. Today, there is handset based location that is much, much more accurate. This device is much smarter today than a legacy device.
Well,
And
definitely.
the network can query that device and say, where are you? That device
Mm.
has intelligence in it because it
Oh,
says,
so,
well, I
so
see
yeah, the
GPS. Yeah, I see GPS, I see Wi-Fi access points, I see cellular towers, and I'm going to make an estimation of where I am based on all of that. And that's where I'm getting 2 meter, 1 meter accuracy of where that
yeah, it's kind
device
of
is.
like it's not the same thing. Like they're related, so it's kind of like those alerts you get that will make your phone ring no matter if it's on silent, if
Yes.
it's on do not disturb. The Amber alerts, and hopefully we'll never see that, but the emergency broadcast system will
Yep.
ring your phone in any case, no matter as long as it's turned on, it will ring. So in a sense, it's the reverse. There's APIs that first responders can use that we don't have access to, that can ping the phone and get the information out to the phone if it's
Sure.
available.
Sure. And all
Oh,
of that's
yeah.
been tried and true and tested. And, when they first tried that, the reverse 911 broadcast alerts, they ended up playing Lady Gaga through an error in the system. That all finally got worked out. The wireless alerts now with, through the wireless, the WIA, wireless emergency access. Um, that's all working very, very well now. They're targeting and geofencing, and with devices understanding where they are, that's becoming very, very accurate to a very micro area. Um, and that's another thing that we're doing in the enterprise space. We're building in our products, we're building APIs that allow communications platforms to consume and utilize our services on REST APIs um, to target and geofence and report location and do a lot of interesting stuff. So we're providing the back end engines that is consumable by the communications platforms.
So how does that work? Is there a general API that an application platform can connect to? Is it, I suppose it's HTTP based. How does it work?
Yeah, so there's a REST API that you can connect with our services, and we have a whole bevy of services that will do queries on the networks, utilize the different resources that give you a toolbox to work with, so you can consume that data and then control the proper routing. There are now national networks available through my services where you can route to 911 anywhere in the country based on location that's consumable from me, saying, okay, I've got Luca making a 911 call. This is where he
Mm.
is. This is the IoT data. Not only is he making a 911 call, but through accessible wearables or IoT sensors of where he is, connected building technology. Uh, Not only is he making a 911 call, but it's 190 degrees in the immediate vicinity. Oh, gee, something's on fire, right?
Mm.
So, this is intelligent data that we can now pass into the public safety broadband networks to make a much more intelligent communications notification into public safety.
There's a lot of that in mobile devices too. Look at the accident alert. If you have a car accident with your phone, especially iPhones, more recent versions, or even if you fall down and you're wearing an Apple Watch, it
Sure.
will automatically try and call someone, or and it has parameters like if you just fall and get up, it will not trigger anything. But if you fall and your watch stays on your wrist and stays down for an amount of minutes, it will actually trigger an emergency call. That's very yeah, it's probably the future. Like it's also probably the only way to really obviate the fact that in many cases there's no correlation between a phone number and where you are. So
Oh,
it has to go through
absolutely.
some other channel.
Yeah, about a year and a half ago, I went to go get a cup of coffee late in the afternoon. The place I was going happened to have closed early that day. And I turned around and I was walking back out to my car and I tripped over a planter that was in front of the building and hit the
Oh,
ground. I got 7 stitches in my forehead, but this went flying about 20 feet away from me. But what didn't go flying was this.
yeah,
And it asked me, "Do you want to call 911?" And when I went like that and came back with a handful of blood, yes, I want to
yeah,
call 911. And I ended up getting 7 stitches in my forehead. I didn't, but I could have passed out.
yeah. And then it will probably. I don't know if what happens in that case, but maybe the device just places the call for you in that case.
Sure. But wouldn't it be great if it did had location and I mean, so there's a lot of things that can happen. You don't want to just blindly start doing this, but we can use technology. And the problem is that not enough technologists understand the public safety world. They don't understand the tool sets that are available, and public safety doesn't understand technology. So they make bad assumptions, and technologists make bad assumptions because they're two totally incompatible worlds. So it's
Yeah, there's
people like me need to bring them together because I understand both.
something that I like saying, but honestly, I see that very often is that in the industry there is a certain perceived level of danger to all of these things. In many cases, especially people doing implementation for their own company, not service companies like Signalwire, we're all fully aware. We all try to be compliant, but find people who use services for their own business. Uh, I've heard many times chilling remarks like, "Well, we won't do it. We'll wait for a fine to come. When they fine us, we'll do it."
Yep,
And one thing is getting fined, but one thing is getting sued for $10 million. Now that's going to shatter your business.
sure. No, absolutely, and that's the number one question I get is, well, how much is the fine? What are the chances of me getting caught? And I'm like, well, you know what? Ask the hotel down in Marshall, Texas, that got fined $42 million because they didn't program their system correctly. And again, this was our argument back to the FCC that and that laws were needed and they needed to be enforced.
It is very often a case of yeah, people try and make calculations on things they shouldn't. Like again, so what can happen? Well, they can fine me for $20,000. Okay, so I'll wait for that fine to happen because implementing this cost me $200,000. So I'll just wait
Right.
for that to happen. But you
Well,
cannot skirt
and
all
that's
those. Like
that's the attitude people take, unfortunately, and we're trying to change that attitude. But it's and that's why we're speaking at conferences like ClueCon that's coming up. We want the developers to understand the use cases. We want them to understand the tools that are available that they can start building into their applications, and fix these problems, not perpetuate these problems by building the wrong things.
also because it's not if you know how to do it and with help of products like yours, it's not too hard to cater to base 911 requirements. It's not that much complicated. It's and most carriers, suppliers of the IDs and phone numbers, have an API you can use to directly update the contact information for the number instantly. and it's usually very simple. We have an API like that to update everything on our DADs in real time, and we know many people would do it. It's not hard. It's sort of from a developer standpoint, like for myself as a developer, I would like to help you by saying, guys, it's absolutely not hard to do it. Just go take a look. There's APIs for it. Just don't forget about that part because it's not like so. Another example I like to make is stir shaken and signing calls and forging caller IDs, etc. A lot of people do voice over IP skirt some gray areas by using caller IDs they're not entitled to. There's
Yep.
carriers who allow them to, etc. But in that case, in general, it's the worst thing that's going to happen is fraud, which is still bad, and you still get sued. But it's a different level of culpability, right? It's usually nobody died.
Yeah. So what worries me about manipulating numbers and giving people the ability to easily manipulate numbers is the problem of swatting, right? Where I'm spoofing my caller ID to be your home caller ID and saying, this is Luca and I just killed 20 people and I'm going to shoot any cop that comes within 20 feet. This happens, unfortunately. And just, I think it was in St. Louis a few years ago. Um, a gamer, was called somebody in California to swat an ex friend of his that, you know,
Wow.
who beat him in a game. The swatter gave the wrong address, not the intended victim, but someone else. The guy came out of his house, made some kind of furtive movement, ended up getting shot by police and dying. So again, you're
Yeah.
putting the police potentially in a very, very dangerous situation. And, they can't be second guessing all of these
We
things. So they're going to be very, very careful about what services we extend for caller manipulation capabilities, right? Yeah, we can do
we
all these wonderful things, but there are a lot of ethics that come into play.
we do enforce any and all caller IDs, and it's usually pretty strict. So that's but there are many carriers who really don't like, especially carriers at the pure telephony level. We just spying numbers. They don't care which caller ID you use. They're ready. It's getting cracked down hard by Stir Shaken because that's literally stopped working in many cases, but it's still
Yes.
possible, and it's not great for sure. Well, Mark, thank you so much. I mean, looking forward to meeting you at ClueCon. I'll be in person this year, so super happy to see everybody around there.
Yeah, no,
And
very excited. This will be my first time presenting it at ClueCon, so gonna head out to Chicago for the day, and very, very excited to be speaking. It's coming up pretty quickly.
oh yeah, it's closer than we think. It's I'm flying out next Wednesday because we're preparing and getting ready and meeting beforehand. So yeah, it's pretty close. So you still have time to join us though. If anybody wants to join us in Chicago at the Drake Hotel from the 14th to the 17th of August. So in 2 brief weeks, we'll be all out there. And well, Mark will be a speaker, and there will be a lot of interesting talks. And I'm very much looking forward to my favorite conference. It's always been my favorite conference even before I joined SignalWire. So it is always happy to go.
I'm
And first
looking
time, it's
forward
going to be
to have the
super fun.
conversations with all the developers, and because I'll tell you, that's where all the good ideas come from. Hey, I want to do this. Well, I can build tools that let you do that. So I'm very much looking forward to it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mark, for joining us today. Looking forward to seeing you in just 2 weeks. And well, it's going to be a lot of fun.
Great, Luca. Thanks very much. Appreciate you having me on today.
Everybody else, see you next week or at ClueCon. Bye.
Bye bye.